The chains bit into Seraphine's wrists as they dragged her through the snow. She had stopped fighting 3 days ago. Not because she'd surrendered, because the iron had worn her skin down to raw meat and her voice had gone to gravel from screaming at men who did not turn around. So now she moved in silence, bare feet leaving red prints on white ground. Each print a small red flag planted in the frozen earth saying a girl came this way and no one stopped it. She was 20 winters old enough to know the difference between a man who protects you and a man who prices you. Blackmore. The name alone was enough to make grown wolves lower their eyes and find something else to look at. A territory of shadow and cruelty ruled by an alpha whose reputation for savagery had spread across 7 realms like a stain that would not wash out. No wolf walked into Blackmore by choice. The ones brought here in chains rarely walked out at all, and her own uncle had sold her to them. Seraphine lifted her head, because if this was where it ended, she would look at it. She would not go into the dark with her eyes down. The clearing opened before her like a mouth. Dozens of wolves ringed at their eyes, catching torchlight and throwing it back amber and gold. They wore leather and fur, their faces marked by old violence, their bodies loose in that particular way of creatures who have never once had to be afraid. At the center of it all, on a throne carved from blackened bone, sat the alpha of Blackmore, Malric. He was enormous. That was her first thought, and it arrived whole, uninvited. Shoulders like a ridge of mountains, hands built for breaking things that used to be alive. A face that might have been handsome a very long time ago before cruelty moved in and rearranged the furniture. His hair was iron gray, pulled back hard from a face ruled by pale eyes with no warmth in them at all, eyes like 2 coins pressed onto the face of a dead man. Those eyes found her now. "This is the girl." His voice was distant thunder, the kind you feel in the soles of your feet before you hear it. Her uncle stepped forward, Baron Dorn. He bent as he walked, his spine curving into a shape she had never seen him make in all the years he'd lorded over her, the shape of a smaller dog showing its throat to a larger one. And Seraphine had hated a great many things in her short life: the cold, the hunger, the way people looked through her as if she were a window. But she had never hated anything the way she hated the curve of that spine. He had raised her. That was the part that would not stop echoing. After her parents died, he had taken her in, had put a roof over her head and food some nights on the table, had promised she remembered the exact weight of the words that he would keep her safe. He had waited until she turned 20 to show her what the promise had always been worth. As promised, Alpha Malric. Dorn's voice dripped with something oily and eager. My brother's daughter, pure bloodline, untouched, unmarked by any wolf, worth far more than the debt I owe you. Worth. There it was, the word she would carry out of this clearing if she carried nothing else. Not daughter, not child, not even girl. Worth. Malric rose from the bone throne and came down the steps with the slow grace of a landslide, deciding for now to walk. The wolves around the clearing went utterly still, not out of respect, out of the instinct that keeps small animals from moving when the large one is near. He circled her once, then twice. His nostrils flared, and something moved behind those pale dead coins of eyes, something that had not been there a moment before. She carries old blood, he murmured, almost to himself. Very old. He looked at Dorn. Where did your line come from? I do not know, Alpha. Dorn spread his hands, that awful smile still nailed to his face. My brother never spoke of ancestors. We are simple wolves of Sylvain. Nothing special. Nothing special. And here is the strange thing about hearing yourself described as nothing. Part of you agrees, because you have heard it your whole life in 100 small ways, and it has soaked into your bones like cold water. But another part of you, a part you didn't know was there, standing quietly in a back room of yourself, hears it and thinks, no, that is not true, and I am about to find out why. Malric's hand shot out and caught her jaw. He forced her face up into the torchlight claws, pressing small dents into her skin. And Seraphine, bloody-footed, 3 days, chained, hoarse and freezing, glared straight back at him with everything she had left, which was mostly just spite. But spite counts. Nothing special, he repeated, and his mouth curved into something that wanted to be a smile but had forgotten how. I wonder. His other hand moved to her collar. He pulled aside the torn fabric of her dress, baring her left collarbone to the light. And there it was. The mark. It had been there since the day she was born. A crescent moon, pale silver against her skin, resting just below the hollow of her throat. Her mother had called it a blessing, had traced it with a fingertip on cold nights, and called Seraphine her little moon. Her father had looked at it differently. She remembered that too. Her father had looked at the mark with something in his eyes she had been too young to name. She could name it now. It had been sorrow. Malric's breath caught. For a single heartbeat, she would swear to it later. In the long dark hours of the fortress, something crossed his brutal face that looked almost like fear. And then it was gone, swallowed by something worse. A hunger so total it turned her stomach over. "The blood debt is paid," Malric announced. He released her jaw and stepped back. "Take the uncle." Dorn's smile fell off his face. "Kill him." "Wait." Dorn's protest climbed toward a shriek. "Alpha, we agreed." The wolves took him before he finished the sentence. Seraphine watched. She had told herself on the long march north that she would feel something when this moment came. Grief, maybe. He had raised her after all. Some corner of her had braced for grief. She felt nothing. She watched the man who had sold her get dragged into the dark, and she found the well was dry. There was no water in it for him. And maybe that frightened her a little, what it means to have someone burn away every last drop of your care for them. But mostly she simply watched and let him go and turned her eyes back to the monster on the bone throne who now apparently owned her. "The girl comes with me," Malric said. His pale gaze swept the clearing. Every wolf there felt it land on them in turn. "She is not to be touched, not marked, not harmed in any way that leaves a lasting mark on her." A pause, heavy as a dropped stone. "She is mine. Anyone who forgets that will be fed to the winter." Rough hands seized her arms and turned her toward the fortress. It rose at the far edge of the clearing like something that had clawed its way up out of the ground and decided to stay. Black stone, iron spikes along every wall. It did not look like a place where people lived. It looked like a wound in the side of the world, and they were walking her into it. And as she crossed the threshold, the exact moment the shadow of the doorway fell over her, the mark on her collarbone flared with heat. Seraphine gasped. Her knees buckled. She would have gone down if the wolves hadn't been holding her up. Because it did not feel like warmth. It felt like a brand pressed to her skin from the inside, like fire poured into her veins, like something enormous and ancient turning over in a long sleep and beginning slowly to wake. And underneath the pain, beneath it, beyond it, she felt something else. A presence. Distant. But so vast it made her whole body ring like a struck bell. A consciousness so powerful that just the far edge of it, just the outermost fingertip of its attention made her want to fall to her knees and weep without knowing why. It was searching. That was the only word for it. It was searching and hunting and tearing across some impossible distance she could not measure with a focus so desperate and so furious that she felt it in her own chest as a physical ache. It was looking for her. It is looking for me. The thought arrived clear and certain and made no sense at all, because who would look for her, who in all the world had ever once come looking for Seraphine of Sylvain? The fortress doors slammed shut. The night sky vanished. And with it most of the presence the great searching thing pulled back to the far edges of her awareness, muffled now, distant again, like a voice heard through a thick wall. But it did not disappear. Not entirely. The heat in her mark faded to a dull, steady pulse, a heartbeat that was not her own. Somewhere out there in the cold and the dark, something had felt her, had reached the length of the world and brushed for one impossible instant against her soul. And it was coming. 1,000 leagues to the east, in an obsidian tower that crowned the capital of Solmir, the Alpha King woke screaming. Alaric had not slept in 3 days. He had not eaten in 2. His advisors had begged him to rest, had reminded him carefully from a safe distance that even an alpha of his power could not run forever on rage alone. He had heard every word, and he had ignored every one. 300 years. For 300 years, 5 lifetimes, 5 separate agonies, stacked one on top of the other, he had searched. He had sent wolves to every corner of every realm. He had offered fortunes that could buy kingdoms. He had made threats that emptied whole cities. He had waged wars against anyone who slowed his hunt by so much as a single day. And for 300 years, over and over, he had arrived too late. The crescent mark, the silver eyes, the soul he had chased across 3 centuries of death and return, always reaching her a breath too late. Always finding at the end of the long road not her living face but her grave. Illness, accident, murder. 5 times he had felt her enter the world, felt it as a sunrise inside his chest, and 5 times he had thrown everything he had toward her, and 5 times he had come within days or hours or once within a single terrible afternoon, only to find that death had already been there, had already done its work, had signed its name and left. Someone was keeping them apart. He had known it for 200 years, known it the way you know a wound is infected by the way it never ever healed. Some hand, some enemy, some ancient patient cruelty that reached into the world and tore her out of it again and again before the bond could complete and free them both from this endless wheel of loss. This lifetime he had come closer than ever. He had narrowed her to the northern territories. He had known she was alive, had felt her heartbeat echo down the broken, incomplete bond, like a drumbeat heard across a valley at night. Faint, but there, faithfully there. And then tonight the drum had changed. Alaric stood at his tower window, both hands braced against the cold black stone, his breath coming ragged. The mark on his own chest, the twin of hers, the mirror carved into his skin 300 years ago, burned with phantom fire. And through it he felt her, fear, pain, despair, and distance. So much distance it made him want to howl until the stone cracked. "Corwin." His voice broke the silence like a stone through glass. The door opened at once. His first blade stepped through, already armed, already alert, a man who had learned over 60 years of service to sleep with one hand on a weapon whenever his king had not slept at all. Corwin had served Alaric for 6 decades. He had watched this obsessive, endless search from the inside. He had buried alongside his king 5 graves belonging to the same woman. He had never once asked why the king did not simply stop, because he had looked into Alaric's eyes once early on, and he had understood that stopping was not a thing this wolf was capable of. "My king." "She has been taken." Alaric turned from the window, and Corwin, 60 years a soldier, a wolf who did not flinch, took an involuntary step back, because gold fire burned where amber should have been. The wolf beneath the man was rising, barely held inside human skin. "Someone has taken her to Blackmoor." Corwin's face lost its color. "Malric's territory." He chose his next words with great care, a man diffusing something that might at any moment go off. "My king, if we march on Blackmoor without cause, the Council of Alphas will name us oath-breakers. Half the realms will unite against you. Then half the realms will burn." Alaric was already moving, already strapping on blades, already pulling on the dark armor he had worn into a dozen wars fought for one single purpose. His hands did not shake. That was almost the worst part, Corwin thought. In moments like this, the king's hands never shook. "Mobilize everything," Alaric said. "Every wolf who can hold a blade. We march within the hour." "My king." Corwin hesitated, and then he asked the question no one had ever dared ask. "In 300 years you have never once reached her in time. What makes this different?" Alaric stopped at the door. When he spoke, there were harmonics in his voice that did not belong to any human throat. "She has passed 20 winters." He turned, and the gold fire in his eyes blazed brighter, hot enough that Corwin felt it on his skin from across the room. "She has never survived this long before, not once. In 5 lifetimes she has never lived to see 20. A breath, ragged, almost for one instant hopeful. "Whatever has been killing her, whatever has kept us apart this time, it has failed. She is alive, she carries the mark. And I swear to you, Corwin, on every grave I have knelt beside, this time I will reach her before anyone takes her from me again." He strode into the corridor. Behind him, the obsidian tower began to fill with sound, the low rising howl of wolves answering their king's summons, voice upon voice upon voice, until the whole capital of Solmere seemed to lift its head and cry out into the dark. And 1,000 leagues to the west, in a cell beneath a black fortress, a girl who had never been loved a single day of her remembered life curled around the burning mark on her collarbone, and dreamed of a man she had never met, calling her by a name that was not her own. 2 months in Blackmore taught Seraphine the shape of survival. It has a geometry survival. It has rules and angles. She learned which corridors emptied out after dark. She learned which servants would meet her eyes and which had learned the hard way not to. She learned that the kitchens, warm and busy, offered a few stolen minutes of something almost like safety. And she learned that Malric watched her with a patience that grew more frightening, not less, as the days went by. She learned one thing more. There was an old woman in the fortress, a servant, gray-haired and bent, who scrubbed the stone floors of the lower halls on knees that must have ached in the cold. Her name was Marin, and where the other servants had learned not to look at the doomed girl in the tower, Marin looked. The first week she left an extra blanket folded outside Seraphine's door and said nothing and shuffled away before Seraphine could thank her. The second week, a heel of bread still warm from the oven wrapped in a clean cloth. The third week, when Seraphine was sick with fever and shaking, it was Marin who sat with her through the worst of the night, wringing a cool rag, humming some old tune under her breath, asking for nothing. "Why," Seraphine asked her once, hoarse in the dark, "you could be punished for any of this." And Marin had looked at her with eyes gone pale and cloudy with age, but sharp underneath, still sharp. "Because somebody ought to," the old woman said simply. "And most everyone here forgot how, a long time ago." Then she had gone back to her humming, and Seraphine had lain there in a monster's fortress and cried, not from fear for once, but from the strange, unbearable weight of being, for the first time in longer than she could remember, cared for. Malric had not touched her. That was the strangest thing of all, because the Alpha of Blackmore was not a wolf known for restraint. His appetites were the stuff of nightmares whispered in 7 realms. His cruelty toward the ones he claimed was legendary. And yet, he kept her in a chamber that was almost comfortable, brought her food that was almost enough, and came to her each evening simply to sit and stare at the crescent mark on her collarbone with an expression she could never once decipher. "Do you know what you are?" he asked it every evening. Same words, same flat, hungry patience, and every evening she gave him the same answer. "I am no one, a girl from Sylvain sold to pay another man's debt." He would smile that terrible, almost smile, and leave without another word, and she would sit alone with the sound of the lock turning and the burning of her mark, which never fully cooled any more, because whatever had woken the night she arrived had not gone back to sleep. The silver crescent pulsed with a heat that rose and fell like the tide brightest in the black hours before dawn. And with the burning came the dreams, a great hall full of candlelight, a throne carved from white stone, a man whose face she could never quite hold, whose voice she could never quite catch, reaching for her across an impossible distance with hands that trembled, actually trembled with a longing so deep it woke her every time with tears already on her face. Each night in the dream she drew a little closer to him. Each morning she woke with that ache in her chest that had no name, an ache like homesickness, except she had never had a home. So how could she be sick for one? "You're crying again." Seraphine startled. The servant girl stood in the doorway with the morning tray. Her name was Nessa, perhaps 15 winters old, with hollow cheeks and the eyes of someone who had seen far too much for her years. Marin's granddaughter Seraphine had learned the two of them, the last of a family the fortress had swallowed a piece at a time. Seraphine had, over these 2 months, begun quietly setting aside half her bread each morning, because the child was thinner than she was, because someone in this place should be looked after, and if it could not be Seraphine, then let it be this one. The old woman had taught her that without ever meaning to. "It's nothing," Seraphine said, wiping her face fast. "Bad dreams." Nessa set the tray down, glanced at the door, and dropped her voice to a thread. "There's news." "From outside?" Seraphine's heart tripped. In 2 months she had heard nothing of the world beyond these black walls. "What news?" "A war." Nessa's whisper shook with equal parts fear and something almost like wonder. "An Alpha King, from the Eastern realms. They say he's been burning territories for months, searching for someone." The mark on Seraphine's collarbone flared. "Searching for whom?" "A woman." Nessa leaned in. "They say he's offered 100,000 gold to anyone who can lead him to her. They say he's killed Alphas, killed them for refusing to let his wolves search their lands. They say he's gone mad, that a broken bond drove him to it, and that he won't stop, not until he finds her or burns the whole world down to ash trying." Seraphine's hand rose without her permission to press against the pulse of the mark beneath her collar. "Does anyone know who she is, this woman?" "No one. He describes only a mark." Nessa's eyes dropped, down, to the exact spot Seraphine was pressing without realizing. "A silver crescent. Here." The girl touched her own collarbone. The floor tilted under Seraphine's feet. "When you say months," she heard herself say from very far away. "How many months? Since late autumn, they say. Since the night of the first true snow. The night she was brought to Blackmoor." Seraphine sat down hard on the narrow bed. Her mind was a flock of birds all rising at once. An alpha king, searching for a woman with a silver crescent mark, offering fortunes, burning kingdoms, killing anyone who stood in his way, looking for her. But that was madness. She was no one. A girl from a nowhere territory who had never once left her homeland's borders until her uncle marched her north in chains. She had never met an alpha king, had never met any king. She had barely in 20 winters met kindness. "There's more." Nessa's whisper had gone smaller still. "They say this king is old, old, that he's lived 300 years, that he claims," the girl swallowed, "that he claims he's been searching for this same woman across many lifetimes." The dream. The man whose face she could never quite hold. The voice calling her a name that was not her own. "What name?" Seraphine's hand shot out and closed around Nessa's thin wrist. "The name he calls her." "What is it?" Nessa's eyes went wide at the sudden grip. I don't know. The traders didn't say." A heavy footstep sounded in the corridor. Nessa tore free and fled through the servants' door, and Seraphine was left alone, with her racing heart, and her burning mark, and a certainty rising in her like floodwater, cold and total and impossible to stop. That everything she had ever believed about her small unwanted life had been a lie. That night Malric did not sit. He came into her chamber without knocking as always. But he did not take his chair. He crossed the room in 3 long strides and seized her arm hard enough to bruise. "You've heard the news." Not a question. "About the Alpha King," Seraphine said. She did not bother to lie. Her voice had stopped shaking somewhere in the last hour, and she was almost curious about that. "The servants talk." His pale eyes bored into hers. "Do you know why he searches for you?" "I don't know that he searches for me. There must be other women, other marks." "There are not." His grip tightened until she gasped. "The crescent appears once in a generation, once in a century if the bloodlines run true. It marks a single soul, reborn and reborn, the soul of an ancient queen who died before she could complete her bond with the first Alpha King. That's a myth, a story for frightening children. It is history." He let go of her arm, stepped back, and his face rearranged itself into something almost like triumph, which was worse than the anger by far. 300 years ago, King Alaric of Solmere found his fated mate, a woman with silver eyes and a crescent mark, and before he could claim her, before the bond could close, she was murdered by rivals who feared what the two of them together would unleash upon the world. The name landed in her chest like a dropped stone into a deep well. Alaric. She had heard that name before. In dreams she could not quite remember on waking. In the shape of a mouth she had never seen clearly. "The king went mad with grief," Malric went on. "But he did not die. He waited, because he knew the bond was unfinished. He knew her soul would come back. And for 3 centuries he has hunted each return, trying to finish what was begun so long ago." "Why," Seraphine said slowly, "are you telling me this?" And Malric smiled, and she understood in the instant before he spoke that she did not want the answer. "Because I have prepared for 30 years, little queen, for this, for you." The room went very cold. "I knew you would be born again. I knew the mark would surface. And so long before you ever drew breath, I made certain your uncle came to owe me a debt he could never hope to repay. A debt that would be settled when the time came with exactly one thing." The truth came down on her like a roof. "You planned this." Her voice was almost a whisper. "All of it. Your parents died because they refused to give you up." He said it lightly, as if remarking on weather. Your uncle's ruinous debts were arranged by my agents coin by coin across years. Even the timing of your sale was calculated to fall before Alaric's wolves could reach Sylvain and take you first. He leaned close. His breath was hot against her ear. You are the key to unmaking the most powerful alpha in 7 realms. When I claim you, when I complete the bond he has chased for 300 years, his power collapses, and Solmir falls to Blackmoor without a single sword drawn. Her hands curled into fists at her sides. I will never accept your claim. You will not be given a choice. He straightened, pale eyes gleaming. The blood moon rises in 3 nights. The old rituals do not ask for consent. They ask only for flesh and blood, and the mark that binds you to a fate you were born into. He turned, walked to the door. Sleep well, little queen. The lock clicked shut behind him. Soon you will dream only of me. And Seraphine stood in the dark, her back against cold stone, her heart slamming her mark burning brighter than it ever had. 3 nights. 3 nights standing between her and a fate she could not survive as herself. She slid down the wall until she sat on the freezing floor, and she pressed both hands over the burning crescent, and for the first time in a very long time, Seraphine of Sylvain, who had been sold like grain, priced like cattle, called nothing special by a monster on a throne of bone, did not weep, she thought, because somewhere out beyond these walls in the cold and the dark, something was still coming for her. She could feel it in the pulse of the mark, in the steady drumbeat that was not her own heart. And whatever it was, whoever he was the only living soul in all the world who had ever, across 300 years and 5 lifetimes of dust, refused to stop looking for her. Not for her worth, not for her blood or her mark or the power she could be bent into, for her. And in the dark of that cell, a small hard seed of something she had never once been allowed to feel began quietly to grow. Hope. Somewhere beyond the walls she thought she heard wolves howling, but the sound was still too far away to reach her. Not yet. 2 nights before the blood moon, the stranger came to her window. Seraphine had not slept since Malric's visit, because sleep was a luxury for people who had a future, and she was no longer certain she had one. She had paced the chamber until her feet ached, had run her hands along every stone of every wall, searching for a crack, a seam, a weakness, anything. Had screamed into her pillow until her raw throat gave out entirely. None of it mattered. The door was solid iron, the window was 40 feet above sheer black rock, and the servants who brought her meals had learned somewhere in these 2 months not to look at a woman who was already in every way that counted dead. All but 2 of them. But even Marin's kindness could not open an iron door. So this was it. This was the shape of the end. She would be claimed by a monster and turned into a blade to be driven into the back of a king she had never met. And there was nothing she could do to stop it, which was exactly when the tapping came at the glass. She thought she'd imagined it. The wind, maybe. The fortress had 100 voices at night, and none of them were kind, but the second tap turned her around. A face at the window 40 feet up a sheer wall, staring in at her through a skin of frost. A young man. Sharp features, dark hair whipped sideways by the wind, and amber eyes burning with an urgency that cut straight through the glass. He clung to the tower wall with claws that should not have been able to hold, that no living wolf should have been able to sink into black stone, and he gestured sharp and quick. Open it. Seraphine hesitated for exactly 1 heartbeat, because trust was another thing she had never been given the chance to practice. Except she looked at that face, at those burning eyes, and something older than caution moved in her. So she crossed the room and worked the latch with fingers gone clumsy from cold, and the stranger poured through the opening like water finding a crack. He landed without a sound. Dark leather that drank the shadows. The build of a warrior. A wolf of real power, the kind that made her own skin prickle. And through the torn collar of his shirt over his heart, she saw a mark that stopped her breath cold. A crescent moon, ringed in a circle of thorns. "You bear his mark," she whispered. "I am Corwin." His voice was barely a breath. "First blade of the Shadow Guard, sworn to Alaric, Alpha King of Solmir." His amber eyes held hers with a fierceness that was almost painful to meet. "I have searched for you for 20 years, my lady, since the night your mark first called across the void between lives and found my king dreaming. I don't understand any of this." "You will." He moved to the door. pressed his ear to the iron, listening. But not here, not tonight. Malric has tripled the guard since yesterday. He knows my king is close. How close? 3 days' march, with an army. He turned back to her. Less, if he comes alone, which is exactly what Malric is counting on. She felt the trap close in the pit of her stomach before he even named it. The blood moon ritual needs power to complete, Corwin said low and fast. An alpha's power, so Malric has laid a snare. He means to let my king breach these walls, and then take him, and use you both in the ceremony. The room seemed to tilt. He can't know Alaric is coming. Malric has been building this for 30 years. He has spies in every territory between here and Solmere. Corwin's jaw tightened and something dark moved behind his eyes, something he clearly did not want to say. And there is more, my lady. We have long believed that he is the one who has been killing you. The words did not fit into any shape she recognized. Killing me. In your past lives, every return, you die before my king can reach you. Fever. A carriage that overturns. A blade in an alley. Corwin's voice dropped. We never found proof. But ask yourself who else gains from keeping the bond unfinished, who else has waited patient as a spider for exactly this? And Seraphine thought of Malric's smile, of his terrible patience, of the 30 years he claimed to have spent building this, of the way he looked at her mark, not with lust, but with the cold hunger of a man looking at a lock he has finally found the key to. He killed me, again and again, just so he could be the one to claim me now, and use that claim to destroy a king I have never met. The thought should have shattered her. Instead, and this surprised her, it made her furious. I can't take you tonight, Corwin said. The wards on this tower would wake every wolf in Blackmoor the moment we crossed them. But I needed you to know. Before the blood moon rises, I needed you to know the truth. What truth? He paused at the window ledge, and when he looked back at her, the fierceness in his amber eyes softened into something that was almost reverence, almost prayer. My king has loved you for 300 years, through 5 lifetimes of loss, through a grief that would have broken any other wolf in the world into dust. A breath. He has never taken another mate, never stopped searching, never once in 3 centuries allowed himself to believe you would not come back to him. Tears rose hot in Seraphine's eyes, because she did not know this king. She had only dreams, only fragments, only a burning mark and a voice she could not quite catch calling her a name that was not hers. And yet something in her chest cracked open at his words, something that had been sealed shut her entire life. Tomorrow night, Corwin said already halfway through the window, the wind reaching in to grab at his dark hair. I will come back, with others. We will break the wards and take you out before the ceremony can begin. You must be ready to move, without hesitation. Do you understand? And if you can't reach me in time, his expression hardened into something like grief, then my king will tear this fortress apart, stone by stone. He will kill every wolf who stands between you and him. A pause, and his voice cracked just slightly on the last of it. And if he is too late again, I do not think there will be a 6th life, my lady. I think this is the last chance, for both of you. Then he was gone. Out the window and into the dark, swallowed whole by the night, and Seraphine stood frozen, staring at the empty square of black, where a stranger had knelt at her window and told her she was loved. She crossed to her narrow bed, sank down onto it, pressed her hand over the burning crescent at her throat. Tomorrow night. She only had to survive. Until tomorrow night. She could do that. She had survived 20 years of being no one. She could survive 1 more day of being wanted. The door exploded inward. It did not open. It came off its hinges, solid iron torn loose and thrown, and Malric strode through the wreckage with his pale eyes blazing, 6 wolves flanking him, all of them moving with the smooth, terrible coordination of animals bred and trained to kill. Did you truly believe, he said, crossing the room in 3 strides, that I would not smell an intruder in my own fortress? His hand closed around her throat. He lifted her clean off the floor until her bare feet kicked at nothing, until the room began to smear and darken at the edges. What did he tell you? What did Alaric's dog whisper in your ear? She clawed at his wrist, fought for air that would not come. Nothing, she managed, a thread of sound. He told me nothing. Lies taste different than truth, little queen." His grip tightened and stars burst across the black. "Your heart is racing. Your scent has changed. You have been given hope." His almost smile split his brutal face like a wound reopening. "And I am going to so enjoy taking it back from you." He dropped her. She crumpled to the floor, choking her throat, a column of fire where his fingers had crushed it. And through the ringing in her ears, she heard him turn to his wolves and speak the words that ended everything. "The ceremony moves to tonight." "No. The blood moon rises in 6 hours. That is time enough to ready the altar and call the old spirits. By dawn the bond will be closed." "No." The word tore itself out of her ruined throat. She dragged herself up onto her hands. "The ritual needs power. You said it yourself. You need Alaric." Malric laughed. It was a horrible sound, like something dry cracking in a cold room. "I need an alpha's power, and I have my own." He flexed one clawed hand, admiring it. "It would have been sweeter, yes, to use his strength against him, to make him watch as I close the bond he has chased for 300 years, but I find I am not a patient wolf tonight." His pale eyes came back to her. "And your hope offends me. I want it gone." He turned to his men. "Bind her, bring her to the altar, triple the perimeter. If Alaric's wolves come for a rescue, kill every last one of them." Rough hands seized her arms. Iron closed around her wrists for the second time in 2 months. Chains, always chains, and they hauled her upright and dragged her toward the ruined door. And she fought. Of course she fought. She threw every ounce of herself against them, and it was like a sparrow throwing itself against a stone wall, and it mattered exactly nothing. But her mark. Her mark blazed with a heat she had never felt before. And this time the presence answered. Not distant, not muffled behind a wall of stone. Close. So close it stole the breath from her lungs. A consciousness of overwhelming power that slammed against the edges of her mind like a battering ram against a gate. And images flooded her. A wolf the size of a warhorse, black as a starless night, running flat out through deep snow. Eyes burning with 3 centuries of longing. A voice that rang in her bones instead of her ears. "Hold on, I am coming. Hold on to me." "She's communing with him," one of the wolves snarled. "My lord." Malric spun. His hand cracked across her face hard enough to snap her head sideways and fill her mouth with the taste of copper. "Gag her, blindfold her, and bring the wolfsbane chains." The presence in her mind roared a wall of protective fury, helpless and enormous as they wound cloth across her mouth and eyes and clapped cold, sickening metal around her wrists that made the fire in her veins gutter down to embers. They dragged her down. Down spiral stairs that had not seen torchlight in decades, down into the roots of the fortress, into a chamber carved from the living rock of the mountain itself. And there at the center an altar of black stone, and above it a wound in the ceiling opening onto the night. And through that wound the moon, rising, red as spilled blood, old as death. The blood moon had come. Malric began to chant. The words were in no tongue. She knew harsh, scraping syllables that dragged across her ears like broken glass drawn slowly over skin. And the air thickened, and the shadows in the corners of the chamber deepened and deepened until they were no longer shadows at all, but something that watched, something answering from the dark spaces between worlds. Power gathered around the altar, cold and wrong and starving. Even blinded, even gagged, even with the wolfsbane dragging her under. Seraphine could feel the bond to Alaric pulled taut as a rope stretched to its breaking point. He was coming. She knew it with total bone-deep certainty, and she knew with the same certainty that he would not arrive in time. "For 30 years I have built toward this hour," Malric's voice cut through the chanting. She felt him ascend the altar steps, felt his pale gaze fix on her with a hunger that made her skin crawl. "Through 3 of your lifetimes I have watched and prepared. Do you know how hard it is, little queen, to arrange a death that looks like chance, to time a murder so precisely that Alaric arrives always just a few days too late?" And through the blindfold in the dark behind her own eyes, Seraphine understood what he was about to confess, and braced for it. And it landed anyway. "Yes, I killed you, again and again." Corwin was right. The fever that took you in your second life, that was my poison in your village well, the carriage in your third, my wolves spooking the horses on a mountain road, the fire in your fourth, the blade in your fifth. A soft, satisfied breath. All of it, all me, all of it patiently waiting for this, for tonight, for the one perfect convergence when everything I built would finally come due. The chanting swelled, the pressure in the chamber crushed against her chest until she could barely draw breath. And now at last you have lived long enough. The crescent has reached its full strength, and when I claim you tonight I will not merely close the bond. His voice dropped to something almost tender, which was the most horrifying thing of all. I will take everything that should have been his, 300 years of gathered power, poured into me, in a single moment. She heard the blade slide from its sheath. She could not see it, but she could feel the wrongness of it, the same unnatural green as the torches humming with a hunger of its own. She thought of a black wolf running through snow. Hold on. She thought of a stranger at her window telling her she was loved. Hold on. She thought of an old woman humming in the dark, wringing a cool rag, asking for nothing. Hold on, she thought. And this was the strangest thought of all, arriving from some deep, still room inside her that Malric could not reach with all his chains. She thought, I am not nothing. Whatever else is true tonight, that was always the lie. I am not nothing, and I never was. Malric raised the blade, and the ceiling exploded. Stone and snow and screaming wolves cascaded down through the wound that had shown the blood moon, and through it, through the ruins, something enormous descended. A shape of shadow and fury, claws like swords, eyes like two furnaces burning with 300 years of rage that had waited a very, very long time to become fire. Alaric had come. His wolf form was nothing like the stories, nothing like anything she could have imagined. He was terror wearing fur, death given a body and a purpose, a predator so far beyond any wolf in that chamber that the air itself trembled around him, and every creature there, even Malric, went for one instant entirely still. He landed on the altar. The black stone shattered beneath him. Malric screamed an order. His wolves surged forward. They died. He moved through them the way a scythe moves through wheat. There was no fight. There was only aftermath. Claws opened throats. Jaws closed on skulls. Bodies flew in every direction, already broken before they struck the walls. 12 wolves, 6 heartbeats. And then there were no wolves. Only Malric scrambling backward off the ruined altar, his pale eyes stretched wide with something Seraphine had never once seen in them. Fear. Rough claws tore the blindfold from her eyes. The gag. She gasped, blinking, and there he was, the black wolf. Gore dripping from his muzzle, turning slowly to face the alpha who had murdered his mate 5 times across 3 centuries. He did not lunge. He stalked. Slow. Certain. A creature that has finally, after an unimaginable span of loss, cornered the thing it has hunted its whole existence. And when he spoke without moving his jaws, a voice that resonated in the bones of everyone left alive in that chamber. You murdered her. 5 times. You stole her from me across 5 lifetimes. Malric's back struck the chamber wall. There was nowhere left to run. The old laws speak of justice, for crimes such as yours. The black wolf lunged, and Seraphine closed her eyes, because she did not need to see it. The sounds were enough, and they were wet, and they were final, and there was not one drop of pity in her for the wolf who had killed her across 3 centuries and called it patience. When she opened her eyes again, Malric was gone. The chamber was painted red, and a man stood where the wolf had been, dark hair matted with blood, a chest heaving with the last of the change, and his gaze locked onto her with an expression that reached straight through every wall she had spent 20 years building around her heart and pulled them down, all of them at once. Seraphine, he breathed. Her true name, the name she'd been given at birth, and that alone would have undone her. But it was the second name that made her knees give way. He crossed the ruined chamber toward her with slow, trembling steps, as if she might vanish, as if 300 years had taught him that reaching for her too fast was how he lost her. And he whispered the second name like something holy, something he had carried unspoken across 5 graves. Eloin, the name from her dreams, the name that had echoed in her sleep for 2 months in a voice she could never catch, the name of the woman she had been when they first found each other in a great candlelit hall 300 years ago. and as his blood-slicked hands rose and cupped her face with a gentleness that seemed impossible for hands that had a moment before torn 12 wolves apart, as his forehead came down to rest against hers, as 3 centuries of searching finally found its ending. Seraphine remembered. Not everything. Not yet. But enough. Enough to know his voice. Enough to know the exact weight of his hands. Enough to know that the ache she had carried her whole life, the homesickness for a home she'd never had a name and a face and was standing in front of her now, shaking, weeping, alive. "You found me," she whispered. "You actually found me." "I will always find you." His voice broke clean in half. "Do you hear me in every life? Past every grave? I will always—" But she never heard the end of it, because Corwin's voice cut through the chamber from the shattered opening above, sharp with an alarm that turned the blood in her veins to ice. "My king." Alaric's head came up. "Riders, from the east, hundreds of them." A breath. "They carry the banner of House Thornwell." And Seraphine watched the joy drain out of the face she had waited 300 years to see. Watched it replaced by something cold and old and terrible. Because Malric was dead. The monster on the throne of bone was gone. And somehow, impossibly, it was not over. Somehow it was only beginning. They climbed out of the ruined chamber hand in hand over the bodies without a second glance for any of them. The spiral stairs went up and up, endless, and Seraphine barely felt them beneath her bare feet, because her whole being had narrowed to one single point of warmth, his hand around hers. The Alpha King of Solmere. The wolf who had searched 300 years and found her at last in the roots of a fortress carved like a wound into the earth. They came out into the courtyard, and into chaos. Alaric's wolves had taken the walls. But something was wrong, she could feel it before she could name it, in the way they moved, the way they kept glancing east. And then Corwin was running toward them across the broken flagstones, dark hair, wild amber eyes bright with alarm. "My king, the riders, hundreds, House Thornwell's banner." Alaric's face went hard as the black stone around them. "Malric's allies." "There's more," Corwin's voice dropped. "We took one of Malric's lieutenants alive, before he could run, and under questioning he broke." He looked at Seraphine as he said the rest as if she deserved to hear it first. "Malric was never working alone. House Thornwell has been coordinating the interference. Across all 5 lifetimes. Their matriarch, the Lady Ravenna, she is the one who taught him the blood moon rites." Seraphine felt the ground drop away beneath her. "She's the one," Corwin said. "The architect, behind everything. And she is riding here, now, with an army at her back." She must have heard the ritual failed. Alaric's growl rolled through the courtyard. "She's coming to finish what Malric started." "How many wolves do we have?" Seraphine asked. Corwin's jaw tightened. 43, my lady. We rode light, for speed." 43, against hundreds. And on the eastern horizon torches. A river of them, flowing toward the fortress like malevolent stars fallen out of the sky and given the will to hunt. "We can't fight those numbers," Alaric said. Low, fast, his mind racing ahead of his mouth. "Not here, not with you unprotected." "The tunnels beneath the fortress," Corwin said. "They join the old mine passages, run clear under the mountains. We could reach the Solmere border in 2 days." She would follow. Alaric's hand tightened around Seraphine's. "Hunt us across the mountains until we were cornered, exhausted. No, we need time. Time to close the bond. Time to unite our strength." He turned toward the torches, and for the first time she saw it, the thing 300 years of loss had planted in him. Not fear of death, fear of her death, the one thing that could still break him. "I will not lose you, not now, not when I am finally holding you." And Seraphine looked at the wolves around her. 43 of them. Wolves who had ridden through winter for a woman most of them had never met. Wolves who would die, all of them, in this courtyard because their king would sooner burn than let her go. And she looked at the torches on the horizon, and a choice formed in her mind, cold and clear and entirely her own. "There's another way," she said. Her voice sounded strange to her, steady, certain. She had never heard it sound like that before. "She wants me, so give her what she wants." Alaric spun to face her. "No." Listen to me. No, absolutely not. If I walk to her willingly—" Seraphine pressed, gripping his hands in both of hers. "She has no reason to attack your wolves. She takes me back to Thornwell for whatever ritual she's planned, and that buys you time, time to regroup, time to bring an army that can actually match hers." "You would have me hand you," Alaric said, and his voice broke down the middle, "to the woman who has murdered you for 300 years, Seraphine. I cannot. I will not." And here was the thing. Here was the thing that stopped her heart for a beat and then made it stronger. He was not ordering her. He was not seizing her or deciding for her the way every wolf in her life had decided for her. He was begging. She reached up and cupped his blood-streaked face in her hands, the same way he had done to her in the chamber below, and she felt him go still under her touch. "You have spent 300 years arriving too late," she said softly, "because you were always running toward my grave, not toward me." She held his burning gaze. "This time is different. This time I am choosing. Not being sold, not being taken. Choosing. Do you understand what that is worth to me? After a whole life of being handed from one hand to the next like coin." Alaric's eyes shone. "And if she kills you before I reach you—" Seraphine smiled, though the tears ran freely down her face. "Then you find me in the next life, just as you always have." He made a sound that was half growl and half sob, and he crushed her against his chest, his arms wrapping around her with a desperate strength that shook. "I have loved you through 5 deaths," he whispered into her hair. "I do not know if I can survive a 6th. You won't have to." She pulled back just enough to meet his eyes. "Because I am not the woman who died in those other lives. Not anymore. I have her memories now. I know what is coming, and I will fight to stay alive until you reach me. I swear it." She kissed him. One kiss, a promise, a prayer, a goodbye she desperately hoped was only temporary. Then she turned, and she walked toward the army riding to claim her. Behind her, Alaric's howl split the night, a sound of grief so vast that wolves across the whole realm lifted their heads in answer. But he did not follow. He let her go. Because after 300 years of loss, he had finally learned the hardest thing love ever asks of anyone: that some choices are not his to make, that loving her meant at long last trusting her to choose her own fate. Lady Ravenna of House Thornwell was everything Malric had only ever aspired to be. Where his cruelty had been a blunt instrument, hers was a scalpel. Where his ambition had been written plainly on his face, hers was folded away beneath layers of silk and courtesy so perfect it was its own kind of weapon. She received Seraphine in a tent of crimson velvet, seated on a throne that traveled with her army, her silver hair coiled into an architecture that must have taken servants half the night to build. So, her voice was music, almost pleasant, almost kind. "This is the soul that has slipped through my fingers for 300 years. Seraphine stood before her, wrists bound, ringed by guards who watched her with a hunger she was by now weary of. She said nothing, because the walk from Blackmore had given her time. Time to think, time to remember more of what Elowen had known, of power, of politics, of the old rights that wolves used to bind their mates, buried in Seraphine's memory across 5 lifetimes, waiting for the one moment she would need them. No defiance. Ravenna rose and circled her with the grace of a woman who had never once in her long life been afraid. "No declarations about your beloved king riding to your rescue. Malric wrote to me of your spirit. He was quite taken with it. I confess I expected more fire." "Fire serves no purpose here." Seraphine's voice was flat, controlled, buying seconds, buying minutes. "You have already won." Ravenna's laugh was crystal cracking. "How wonderfully practical. Though I suspect that calm is a performance, you are stalling, hoping Alaric arrives before I finish what Malric could not." A pause. A smile that showed teeth. "Won't he?" "Perhaps, if I give him the chance." "Ah!" Ravenna knelt down before her, bringing their faces level close enough that Seraphine could smell the cold rosewater of her. "But I did not spend 3 centuries building this to be undone by a simple rescue child. Do you want to know why? Why I have killed you across 5 lifetimes? Why I have poured more years, more gold, more patience into keeping you from him than most wolves pour into their entire dynasties? Power, Seraphine said, meeting her silver eyes without flinching. Alaric's power, same as Malric. Malric was a fool who understood nothing. Contempt dripped from every syllable. He thought power could be stolen, poured from one cup into another like wine, as if a thing of that magnitude could simply change hands. Then what do you want? Ravenna leaned closer, her breath warm against Seraphine's cheek. I want what was mine 300 years ago, before you existed. And there it was, the truth finally unfolding. I was Alaric's betrothed, before your precious Elowen appeared with her crescent mark and her moon priestess blood and her fated bond that swept aside every arrangement in 7 realms as if it were nothing, as if I were nothing. The mask cracked just slightly, and behind it Seraphine saw the thing that had driven 3 centuries of murder. Not ambition, not even hatred quite, something smaller and more terrible than either. I was meant to be his queen. I was meant to rule at his side. And then a nobody with silver eyes walked into that hall and took it all. The pieces fell into place. You hired the assassin, Seraphine breathed. The one who killed Elowen at the bonding, 300 years ago. Hired him, trained him, placed him with my own hands. Ravenna rose, her silk skirts whispering, and when Alaric refused to accept her death, when he stood in that ruined hall and swore he would wait for her soul to return rather than complete the bond with me, I understood. Killing her once would never be enough, so I killed her twice, and a 3rd time, and a 4th, and a 5th, each time hoping that this would be the death that finally broke him, that finally made him turn to me. But he never did, Seraphine said, and she felt her own voice strengthen despite the ropes, despite the guards. 300 years, and he never once turned to you, never took another mate, never even looked. Ravenna's hand cracked across her face, splitting her lip. Because the bond does not lie. Seraphine finished, tasting blood, refusing to look away. He loves me, not for politics, not for power. Our souls know each other, and no army you can raise will ever change that. Ravenna straightened, composed herself one breath at a time, the mask sliding back into place. A soul can be reborn in a different body, she said. Cold now, all the music gone out of her. It has happened 5 times already. When I kill you tonight it will happen again, but this time, and something new entered her eyes, something that turned Seraphine's blood to ice. This time I will be ready. This time I will find you in your infancy, and I will raise you myself, mold you, shape you, and by the time Alaric finds you in your 7th life, you will not be his. Her smile was the most frightening thing Seraphine had ever seen. You will be mine, my weapon, my creature, shaped from the cradle to serve me, and together we will finally destroy the king who chose a ghost over me. And Seraphine understood then what she was truly looking at, not a monster who wanted to kill her. She had met that monster. He was dead beneath a fortress painted across a chamber floor. No, this was something worse. This was a woman who did not see people at all, who looked at a living soul and saw only a tool that had not yet been properly made, who would take a child from the cradle and hollow her out and fill her back up with obedience and call it victory. And in that moment Seraphine saw the whole ugly shape of her own life laid bare. Every hand that had ever held her had held her the same way, as a thing, a debt, a key, a weapon in waiting. Not once in 20 winters had any of them looked at her and simply seen a girl. And something in her, standing very still in that back room of herself, said quietly, "Enough. Take her to the ritual site," Ravenna commanded her guards. "The blood moon has set, but the old magics can be called by other roads. By dawn her soul will be loosed, sent screaming into the dark, and I will be waiting on the far side to catch it." They dragged her through the encampment, and Seraphine searched every step, every breath for a crack, a gap in the guards, a distracted blade, anything, because she had promised Alaric she would fight to stay alive, and she meant to keep that promise with everything she had. But there was nothing. These were not Malric's brutes. These were Thornwell's finest, disciplined and cold, and they gave her nothing. The ritual site was a clearing ringed by standing stones. Ancient things carved with symbols so wrong that looking at them too long made her eyes ache and her stomach turn. A stone slab waited at the center, its surface dark with the stains of very old blood. Torches burned at the 4 points of the compass, their flames an unnatural, sickened green. They bound her to the slab with chains that burned. Wolf's bane, woven into the metal itself. She felt the fire in her marked gutter, and Dim felt the strength drain out of her like water out of cupped hands. And then she saw the prisoners, a line of them dragged forward from the edge of the clearing. Servants, from Blackmore. She knew their faces, the ones who had shown her small mercies during her captivity, and her heart stopped when she reached the front of the line. Nessa. 15 years old, her thin face streaked with tears, and behind her, bent and gray and unbowed, one gnarled hand resting on her granddaughter's shoulder, Marin. The old woman met Seraphine's eyes across the clearing, and she did not look afraid. That was the thing that broke Seraphine's heart clean in two. After everything, after a lifetime scrubbing the floors of monsters, the old woman looked at her with those cloudy, still sharp eyes and gave her the smallest nod, as if to say, "I know you. I know what you are. Do not let us be the thing that stops you." "For every moment you resist," Ravenna said, arriving at the altar with a curved blade that gleamed the same sick green as the flames, "I will kill one of them, starting with the child." "Please," Nessa's voice was a thread, "please, my lady, don't let them hurt me." And Seraphine's heart came apart, because she thought of Alaric racing across the frozen dark toward her. She thought of the bond nearly closed so close. She thought of everything she had to lose by giving up her only leverage. And then she thought of Eloan, the woman she had been. A moon priestess before she was ever a king's mate. A woman who had valued the lives of others above her own safety. A woman who would never, not in any lifetime, not for any prize, have watched a child die to buy herself another hour. And she thought of an old woman who had said in the dark, when there was nothing in it for her at all, because somebody ought to. "And neither will I," Seraphine thought, "because I know what it is to be small and unwanted and looked past. I have been that child my whole life, and someone loved me anyway. I will not become the thing that steps over her." "Wait." The word tore from her raw throat. "Wait. I'll cooperate." Ravenna's smile widened in triumph. "I knew you would see reason." "But not," Seraphine said, and something ancient and enormous began to stir in her chest, "for the ritual you have planned." Ravenna's smile faltered. "Eloan was a moon priestess," Seraphine went on, and her voice was changing now, gathering harmonics that did not belong to a single throat. "Before she was ever his mate. And she knew rituals too. Rituals buried in my memory across 5 lifetimes. Rituals that have been waiting for exactly this moment." "You are bluffing," Ravenna snapped, but her composure had cracked just at the edges. "The old magics require willing participation. You said so yourself." Seraphine closed her eyes, and she reached down, past the fear, past the fresh grief and the older grief and the grief beneath that, past 5 lifetimes of dying young and afraid, down into the deep still room inside her where a woman named Eloan had been waiting 300 years to be remembered, and she found the power there. The crescent on her collarbone ignited with silver fire. The wolfsbane chains began to smoke. Ravenna screamed for her guards, but they could not come near, because the silver fire was spreading outward from Seraphine's body, pouring off her like water, like light, like something that had been damned for 3 centuries and had finally found the crack in the wall. The chains melted and fell away, and Seraphine rose from the altar. She rose into her own power, and the standing stones around the clearing began to hum in sympathy. An ancient answering resonance, and the silver fire wrapped around the huddled prisoners like a blanket of warmth, even as it drove Ravenna's wolves stumbling back, scorched from its heat. She saw Marin pull Nessa in against her, the 2 of them ringed in soft light, while the world burned green and gold around them. "All these centuries," her voice rang across the clearing, layered with the voices of 5 lives. "All this time, you hunted me, killed me, stole my lives before I could ever finish the bond that would have ended you." The slab beneath her cracked in half. "But you made a mistake, Ravenna." Ravenna drew her blade and charged a last desperate lunge, the knife driving straight for Seraphine's heart. Seraphine caught the blade in her bare hand. Silver blood welled from where the edge bit her palm, luminous, strange, more light than blood. But she did not flinch, did not fall. The fire in her eyes blazed brighter than every green torch in that cursed ring. "You let me live," she said, long enough to remember. And that Seraphine understood now, holding the blade, holding the woman who had murdered her 5 times. That was the whole of it. That was the flaw in 3 centuries of patient cruelty. Ravenna had spent so long treating her as a thing to be broken and discarded that she had never once imagined the thing might, given time, become a person. And whole. And powerful beyond anything the lady of House Thornwell had ever dreamed of claiming. She melted the blade to slag in her fist. And here is where 300 years of the story could have ended one way. The old way. The way of every tale about wolves and kings and the settling of ancient debts. Seraphine could have killed her. The power was right there, roaring through her, begging for release. Ravenna knelt now in the cracked ring of stone. Her silk-soaked her army fled or scorched entirely at Seraphine's mercy. One thought, one breath of silver fire, and 3 centuries of murder would be repaid in full. Except a howl split the dawn. Seraphine's head came up, because she knew that voice. She had heard it in her dreams for 2 months, and in her bones for 5 lifetimes, and racing toward her. Now across the frozen plain, at the head of a gathering army, came Alaric, shifting from wolf to man, even as he ran, his body flowing from beast to breath, without breaking stride, his eyes finding hers across the whole width of the battlefield. And he did not charge into the killing. He stopped. At the edge of the clearing, at the edge of her silver fire, the most powerful alpha in 7 realms stopped and looked at her. And in his eyes she saw the question. He would not force the choice. He would not make for her the thing he had finally learned in the courtyard of Blackmore when he let her walk away. "It's yours," his eyes said. "All of it. Hers and ours and what happens next. It has always been yours. I only ever wanted to give it back to you." And Seraphine looked down at Ravenna, at the woman who had never once seen a person where a person stood. "You spent 300 years deciding who I was allowed to be," Seraphine said quietly. "You would have carved me from the cradle into a thing that served you. And you never understood, not once in all that time, that a person is not a thing, that we do not get to decide the worth of another soul." Her silver fire banked, softening, pulling back into her. "So I will not do to you what you did to me. I will not treat you as nothing, not even you." Ravenna stared up at her, uncomprehending, because mercy was a language House Thornwell had never learned to speak. "I won't kill you," Seraphine said. "That would be too easy, and too much like you." Instead, she laid one glowing hand against Ravenna's brow. The Moon Priestess' power did not destroy. It revealed. Silver fire poured into Ravenna, not to kill her, but to show her. 300 years of murder all at once. Every child she had orphaned, every family she had unmade, every death she had arranged with such patient, elegant care. All of it crashing through her at once, no longer abstract, no longer distant felt. Ravenna screamed. Seraphine held her there for 10 heartbeats. 20. Then she took her hand away. And Ravenna crumpled to the frozen ground, her silver hair gone white, her face aged decades in moments, her eyes staring at nothing at all. She was not dead. She would never be a danger to anyone again. She would live out her years inside the full weight of everything she had done, which was, Seraphine thought, a far heavier sentence than any blade. And in the sudden silence, a small voice. "My lady." Nessa. Freed from the melted chains, staring at Seraphine with wonder and terror warring on her thin face. And Marin's hand on her shoulder, still the old woman watching with those steady eyes, unsurprised, as if she had known all along. "What are you?" Seraphine turned to her, and in the silver light of her own dying fire she looked at the child, at the old woman beside her, at all the small, overlooked, uncounted people this world had tried so hard to teach were nothing. "I'm someone," she said softly, "who was told her whole life that she was nothing, and decided not to believe it." And then Alaric was there, crossing the clearing at last, gathering her against his chest, and Seraphine turned into him and let herself, for the first time in 20 years, simply be held. Not sold, not seized, not used, held. "You chose," he whispered into her hair, his voice breaking with wonder. "You walked away from me, and you chose, and you came back to me stronger than the whole world. Seraphine, my Seraphine." The bond. She pulled back to look at him. We finish it now, on our own terms. No blood moon, no ritual, no one deciding for us ever again. Here. He glanced around the ruined clearing. Not anymore. She took his hand and pressed it to the mark at her throat. The silver fire cleansed it. What was cursed is clean. What remains is sacred ground. She felt him trembling under her touch. 3 centuries of longing, 5 lifetimes of loss. And now at last the terrifying nearness of the thing he had never dared believe he would hold. I don't know if I can survive this much hope, he admitted, barely a whisper. Then feel my heartbeat. She guided his hand to the pulse at her throat. Feel it. I'm here. I'm alive. And no one not in this life or any other is ever going to take me from you again, not because you'll stop them, because I won't let them. I know who I am now. Alaric closed his eyes, let her heartbeat move through his hand, and slowly, breath by breath, the trembling stilled. When he opened his eyes, they blazed gold and certain. He tilted his head, baring the unmarked skin where his neck met his shoulder. The ancient gesture. A wolf offering himself to his mate, not taking, not claiming, but offering. Then let it be done, he said. Complete the circle, Seraphine, as my equal, as my choice choosing me. She rose on her toes, brought her lips to the offered skin, felt the old power guide her gentle and sure, and she closed the bond. 300 years crashed through them both at once. But it was not the grief she had braced for. Underneath the loss, beneath the centuries of searching, she felt his love vast beyond any ocean, deeper than any grave, a devotion that had never once wavered through 5 lifetimes of heartbreak. And she felt him receive her memories in return. The loneliness of a girl who never understood why she felt incomplete. The dreams of a man calling across impossible dark. The terror of Blackmore. The kindness of an old woman in the cold. The moment she had looked up and seen a black wolf descend through a wound in the world and felt her whole soul say, there you are. There you finally are. They broke apart, gasping foreheads pressed together. The crescent on her collarbone blazed silver. An answering mark on his throat glowed gold. And where the colors met, a bond stronger than death itself, sealed shut, permanent, unbreakable at last. I can feel you, Alaric breathed. All of you. Not echoes, not fragments. You. And I feel you, she whispered, and she was smiling through her tears. All that searching, all that love, 300 years of it, coming home. Around them, his army had formed a ring, and even Corwin, 60 years a soldier, a man who did not weep, stood frozen with tears bright on his face. The sun broke fully over the horizon, and the cycle that had tormented them for 3 centuries finally broke with it. The trials of House Thornwell lasted 3 days. Alaric had wanted to execute every wolf who served Ravenna's conspiracy. Seraphine counseled a different path, and in the end they found a middle way, one that satisfied justice without drowning their new reign in more blood. The wolves who had merely followed orders were given a choice. Swear binding oaths to the crown and serve a decade of penance or take exile beyond the northern mountains. Most swore. The inner circle, those who had known of the murders and chosen to help anyway, faced harder judgment. Seraphine did not watch those sentences carried out. She had seen enough death across 5 lifetimes. Instead, she stood at the window of the obsidian tower in Solmere, her hand resting quietly on her belly, and felt the new lives growing there. Twins. The healers had confirmed it that morning. A boy and a girl. Alaric found her there as the sun went down. He moved without a sound, but she felt him through the bond long before his arms came around her from behind. Ravenna, she asked. Confined to the void tower. She will live out her years in silence, attended by wolves sworn to never speak to her. His hands covered hers over the small curve of her belly. Her mind is too broken for anything else, but she will never harm a soul again. Seraphine leaned back into his chest. And the servants, the ones who were kind to me, freed, every one, given places here if they want them. Alaric's voice warmed. And the old woman Marin, did you know she has already taken over half my household? She looked at my kitchens, sniffed once, and informed the head cook that things would be run differently now. He did not dare argue. Neither, I confess, did I. He pressed a kiss to the top of her head. She has appointed herself keeper of the royal nursery, before the children are even born. I think she decided the matter the moment she heard there would be children at all." Seraphine laughed, and the sound surprised her, because she could not remember the last time laughter had come to her easily. "That sounds like her. She told me something the day she arrived. She said she'd spent 40 years watching that fortress teach people to look away, and that she never once managed it herself." He turned Seraphine gently in his arms. "She said you were the first person in a long time who looked back. I told her she had that backwards, that you learned it from her." Seraphine's throat closed. "And the girl, Nessa, learning to read. She asked me quite seriously whether a servant girl was permitted to want to be a scholar." He smiled. "I told her that in this kingdom no one is permitted to tell a child what she is allowed to become. I thought you would like that." Seraphine looked up at him. "The most powerful alpha in 7 realms, the terror of 100 battlefields, standing in the last of the daylight, one hand cradling the lives inside her, wearing an expression so gentle it broke her heart clean open." "I still cannot quite believe it," she admitted. "Sometimes I wake in the night certain I'll find myself back in that cell, certain all of this was just another dream. This is real." He cupped her face in his hands. "You are real, and I am going to spend the rest of our existence proving it, until you never doubt again." When the twins came, they came with the harvest moon, a boy with his father's eyes and his mother's dark hair, and a girl with silver eyes like Eloin's and a crescent mark that appeared on her tiny collarbone the moment she drew her first breath. Alaric wept when he held them. Seraphine watched through exhausted, joyful tears as the most feared wolf in 7 realms trembled at the weight of 2 small bodies in his enormous arms. And in the doorway, Marin stood with her arms folded and her cloudy eyes bright, nodding slowly, as if the whole world had finally arranged itself the way it should always have been. "They're perfect," Alaric managed. "Seraphine, they're perfect." She reached up to trace the golden mark on his throat that answered the silver one on hers. "They're ours," she said softly. "The children we should have had 300 years ago. And no one, not ever again, will decide who they are allowed to become. They will choose everything for themselves." Outside the window, the wolves of Solmir lifted their voices into the night, and the twins stirred at the sound, their tiny faces turning toward the howls with an instinct older than memory. And so a new chapter was woven into the long tapestry of the realm, the story of a girl who was sold like grain and called nothing special, who was passed from cruel hand to cruel hand and hunted across 300 years, and who in the end was not saved by a king, and not claimed by a monster, and not shaped into anyone's weapon, who saved herself, and chose her own fate, and broke a cycle of hatred not with more blood, but with the one thing none of her enemies had ever once shown her: mercy. She had been told her whole life that she was nothing, and she had decided in a cell beneath a fortress in the dark alone with one old woman humming beside her asking for nothing not to believe it. They had been torn apart by hatred and obsession and the long patient cruelty of those who saw people as things to be used, and they had found each other again through courage, and through faith, and through the quiet, world-changing act of one woman deciding that her own worth was hers and hers alone to name. Now at last they would never be parted again.